Following on from our previous video about raining driving simulators, in this video I'm going to talk about why I personally love raining driving simulators and where and when rain and dynamic tracks make the most amount of sense in driving simulators. Fasten your seatbelts because we're probably going to understeer off into some Armco. Welcome back to the Game of Muscle YouTube channel. Click that like button and subscribe if you enjoy simulator content. Now, first of all, let's enjoy the ASMR of Assetto Corsa's Shader Patch Rain. Isn't that just a beautiful thing? So, as you've noticed, we are at the Nordschleife here. We're in the Shelby Cobra, and as I say, we are using the beta version of Shader Patch, which implements rain into Assetto Corsa. Shader Patch, Shoal, Content Manager, happy days. Now, we're going to go straight to the nugget of the conversation here of where rain makes sense and when it makes sense. Because following on from our previous video, I think people were a little bit confused as to me saying, why? Look at the smear. So good. People were confused as to why I was saying it was a gimmick. And sort of ignoring the fact that it's a gimmick when done incorrectly. When done correctly, it's fantastic. And I would argue, for rain to be done correctly is dependent primarily on two specific things that fortunately the original Assetto Corsa has and does. The first of those two specific things that are vital for wet rain driving of dynamic tracks is a rock solid tyre model in the dry. Specifically, rock solid when it comes to actually driving at and on the limit. Not necessarily tyre temperatures and all the other stuff, that's great, that would be ideal. Tyre wear and all that stuff, that would be really nice as well. But from a fundamental handling and moving a physics object through an environment, which is what you're doing in a driving simulator, in order for wet tracks to work well, a simulator damn sure has to be able to do dry tracks well. Dry sacks? And Assetto Corsa is one of the few simulators that actually has a tyre model that might not be perfect, but when it comes to the actual ply and forgivingness and controllability at the limit, it absolutely nails it. And unfortunately, there's this big myth with people that probably never driven real race cars and only play driving simulators that real cars are ridiculously hard to drive. And, you know, real cars all drive like some 2000s driving simulator or even like iRacing. In reality, and I say this as someone that's driven a real car. Oh, Christ, there's the Armco. I say this as someone that's driven a real car. In reality, in the dry at least, tyres are really forgiving and really quite easy to drive at a basic level and really quite forgiving if you do quite big horrendous slides and drive badly. It's hard to drive a real car quickly and to get the absolute most out of it and competitively, but it's not hard to drive a car around a track and deal with it sliding a little bit. That's from my experience, and that's why everybody I personally know, from pro drivers to amateur drivers that drive from like Formula cars, track day cars, radicals, F3s, you know, they all say the same thing. It seems to be only sim racers that have this weird illusion that real cars handle like iRacing at the limit or other simulators that just bin you at the limit. So AC has a really good, in the dry, super pliable, super forgiving, really controllable limit, which is crucial. Secondly, Assetto Corsa also has absolutely phenomenal force feedback. And specifically, force feedback that tells you the amount of grip that you currently have available on the tyres. You can literally feel the sort of grip envelope of the tyres, and also this guy's going for a move. What are you doing, lunatic? You can feel the grip profile of the tyres. Nice overtake. And you can also really feel the weight of the car moving around, so you can almost drive preemptively. And again, that makes actually driving the car at the limit and balancing the car and not losing it in a surprise way much more how it is to drive in reality. Whereas in reality, rather than feeling things through a steering wheel, you feel things through the G-forces. You've got a constant connection to the road through the G-forces, through your bottom, through your seat of the pants feel. And even if it's by accident, even if Assetto Corsa is trying to simulate what the tyres are putting out, even if it's by accident, the original Assetto Corsa, the force feedback that you get is very, very analogous to those real-world G-forces, allowing you to have a really good idea what the car's doing. Though I would say even Assetto Corsa is like not even 20% of what it's like in reality in terms of how much information you have in reality and how obvious it is what the car's doing in reality. So that's in the dry, right? In Assetto Corsa, in the dry, you get the good pliable tyre model and you get the force feedback that tells you what the car's currently doing, going to do, and what the car can offer. That's in the dry. When driving in the wet, you basically have less of that information. Because the track's going to be more sloppy, the car's going to be generally in some ways less responsive. You're going to have more situations where you need to feel the weight of the car going into a corner to know that you're putting more load on it, to know that you're asking more from the tyres. And in terms of being at the limit, in the wet, you're going to get into much more wild slides that are even harder to catch and correct or play with than you get in the dry. So in order for wet weather to work in a driving simulator, it damn well has to work bloody good in the dry, because the wet is asking much, much, much more of the simulator. Now, I would put some, I don't know what it's called, in brackets. I would say, though, this is another misconception a lot of people have they don't realise. If you have... We're not going to make that. Yes, we are. If you have wet tyres in sort of normal wet conditions on a racetrack, wet tyres are actually often more forgiving than in optimal tyres for in optimal conditions for wet tyres. Wet tyres are actually more forgiving than dry tyres, or have wider controllable slip angles because of the way they're constructed. Now, if you slide around a lot in wet tyres, or they go out of their window or overheat, you will burn through them very quickly. And of course, you still have the issue of paint, curbing, oil, and other stuff on a real-world track that causes wet tyres, even wet tyres, to suddenly snap out. But in optimal conditions for wet tyres, in many ways, they can actually be easier, more communicative, and more progressive than racing slick tyres. So what I'm saying is sort of, you know, you can always... Annoyingly, with sims and racing games in reality, there's normally a counter argument based off another specific scenario. But in general, assuming you're on the same tyres you started the race on, and you've got racing slicks, or you've got just your general track tyres, it starts raining, you're gonna be in a situation where you're effectively getting less information, less grip, and you're going to be more dependent on listening to the game's force feedback through your hands, and more dependent on hoping that the simulator has a pliable over-the-limit handling so you can still push and still recover it if you're quick enough. So those two things are typically missing from just about every other simulator. I can't think of another simulator that has the ply at the limit that the original Assetto Corsa has, combined with the detail of force feedback that Assetto Corsa has. Assetto Corsa Competizione, I actually think the way the track progresses in that and the weather system is actually really nicely done. Also, the difference between the wet tyres and the slick tyres, that's all great. But unfortunately, it just doesn't have the force feedback for you to drive as you would drive in Assetto Corsa, or as you would drive in reality. It's all the force feedback in ACC. You kind of feel as it happens, or after the fact. There's no sort of G-force preemptive build-up and preemptive loading, or what you've got in Race Room, where you have the gyroscopic effect that gives you a really good feel for what the car wants to do before it does it, that allows you to preempt it and really feel on top of the car rather than behind the car or one-to-one with the car. So ACC does have some of the systems there, and that's another point actually. One of the aspects of if you're doing in the context of here we go. Play it bloody hell. In the context of online racing and competitive racing, let's put the windscreen wipers on faster. Another crucial aspect for wet weather to make sense is that you need to have real world weather so you don't know what's necessarily going to happen, but when it does happen, you can sort of take the strategic guess based off the real world information as to what you need to do and how you do it in strategy. The moment you have like a predefined weather, so the admin of the track sets it up and goes, right, it's going to rain halfway through the race, or you set it up yourself, well, you've already negated the tactical and the question mark part of rain driving. So without a proper, so like Automobilista 2 has a system in it where it will take the weather of the day, that's fantastic. But without that sort of thing, it doesn't really, it just doesn't really make sense in the context of your average online race. Now, with Assetto Corsa, with this content manager implementation of the rain, I'm pretty sure that eventually we'll be able to set it to real weather, but generally people are using this rain in Assetto Corsa with content manager as a way to do things like cruising, drifting, offline wet weather driving, and the sort of immersive, celebrating the immersive aspect of wet weather driving and its unique challenge from dry weather driving. And in that context, rain and wet weather is absolutely phenomenal, and just, you know, this adds so much to the original Assetto Corsa. It's a whole nother thing to explore. Look at that! Just look at this. It's not just a case; it's just visuals. In Assetto Corsa, it doesn't do puddles yet as a simulated aspect, so there's no sort of aquaplane nerve for puddles. But you can set the track grip to be matched with what's going on with the rain and soul, so you do get a slippier track that ends up being relatively similar to a wet track, though not identical. This car behind me is in a Ferrari. I'm going to let him pass his way faster. This is AI, by the way, guys, on the Touriswagen, on the traffic mode in Content Manager. Again, another feature from Content Manager that allows you to drive around with other cars, which is fantastic. It's not a Ferrari, I'm an idiot. How can you mix cars up as much as I do? I don't know. So yeah, the rain for something like Assetto Corsa makes perfect sense, but the other aspect and the other point of why it doesn't make sense in many other sims is, as I sort of alluded to in the previous video, is when you've got if you haven't got a ranking system or a proper competitive system for online, rain driving, and also you don't have the force feedback and the pliable handling at the limit. All rain driving does in those simulators that don't have the physics and force feedback, all it does is literally make the driving worse, because you can't expect people to miraculously be able to handle a vehicle on a track that's progressively changing, when the only way to drive many of the simulators, I mean, iRacing is largely guilty of this, ACC is largely guilty of this, the only way to really drive it quickly is to basically Guitar Hero it. You memorise very specific routines in the dry and in ACC, in the wet. You just memorise stuff. You're not driving on the seat of your pants particularly. It's like 99.9% memorisation with a tiny fraction of ad-lib. The rain will just make that worse, other than for the top drivers that have just spent so much time already preemptively practicing in the wet and in the dry. Whereas in something like Assetto Corsa, even with a lower grip track, with the rain on it, you can, because of the ply and because of the force feedback, you can make it up as you go along. You can explore as you drive without it being so ridiculously punishing that everyone other than the people that have just put hundreds of hours of rote memorization just crashes off. Unfortunately, though, Assetto Corsa does not have a ranking system. It has Sim Racing System and Race U, which are really nice, but it doesn't have an official ranking system. So it does mean that online racing with Assetto Corsa in the rain, it will still make it worse, because it does take a lot more skill to drive in with a low grip track, let alone a progressively changing track. So, get through there. I tell you what, there is no way I would drive around the Nordschleife in... No, I would in this car in real life, but not in the wet, and not when it's a Torschwagen. Because you have... Not only do you have cars, you have motorbikes, and you have tow trucks. It's absurd. Even in dry conditions, the real Torschwagen is bonkers, because it's considered... It's basically classed as a German road. So you overtake on the left, and you just have cars and bikes and everything all over the place. It's absolutely insane. Germans are like, yeah, this is a good idea, yeah. But in England, it'd be like, there'd be too much paperwork. We need an Nordschleife in the UK. It'd be terrible, like most things in the UK. But as I say, as an immersive experience, and with AC, this is so good, and I can't believe how well it's been executed. Oh, another point to bring up and why it's so good in Assetto when it's not in other sims. Project Cars 2 and Automobilista 2 this applies to as well. Performance issues. So, only in Assetto, Automobilista 2 and Project Cars 2 do those games run at good frame rates with atrocious weather, to the extent that someone doesn't necessarily need a supercomputer to be able to play in wet weather and still have it look relatively the same for everybody. Or even if someone puts it on the lower settings, it will still look relatively similar for everyone. And why that's relevant is because a huge part of driving in rain online, if you're racing competitively, the lack of visibility that you get from the spray from cars in front is a huge part of the difficulty of driving in rain, is as I say, that lack of visibility. And well, if a driving simulator can barely run at a good frame rate in the dry, Assetto Corsa Competizione, typically they struggle even more driving in the wet, and typically people lower the graphics to the point where the spray and what have you just isn't visible on the lower settings, so then everyone, for a competitive advantage, has to just turn the spray down, because why would you not turn it down if you wanted a competitive advantage? You know, it's like the grass in Battleground Player Unknown or Armour. It's like, well, yeah, you can have the grass on full bore, but you're just making the game harder for yourself. Which is, if you've got AI in single player and you're doing it for this sort of immersive thing, it's fine. It doesn't matter if you have it high or low. You're playing against AI. But if you're doing a competitive game, and keeping in mind that most of the AI in most driving simulators is atrocious, you're going to have to race online in a competitive form to have a good time. Well, you see the problem there. So, this is the thing. I think a lot of people, from my previous video, I was obviously just focusing on the negatives, and you never should do that on YouTube. You always have to sandwich your negatives with positives, and also make sure to make a joke out of the negatives, otherwise all the butthurt people will straw man and take whatever you said out of context, or assume something that you haven't said. So it's my fault. I appreciate that. Should have been more clear in the previous video, but yeah, hopefully from this video, let's turn the headlights off. Look at that, with the headlights on, lighting up the rain, turn them off. Hopefully from this video, it's a more rounded and nuanced view of the pros and cons of wet weather in driving simulators, and why I personally love it. Jesus Christ, Mr. Lotus. I find it a competitive advantage for me, having the dynamic track, the change of the handling, and also I actually find more slippy cars and vintage cars is more suited to my driving style. Being gentle on the accelerator is more suited to my driving style. I'm much better on the accelerator than I am the brake. You just have to be gentle on the brake as well, but that dynamic changing situation is much better for me. I benefit from it, but in the reality of the context of current driving simulators, rain is very problematic unless all the other stuff is done to a very high standard beforehand for the rain to actually make sense and work properly. So, will he stop this bold idiot in a simulator with a glowing Husingveld sign? That's how I can drive in the wet now, because I've got the LED Husingveld sign. Makes you a better driver. He's never going to shut up, is he? This bloody idiot. All said and done, though. I love the rain. I wish it was like it is in Assetto Corsa 1 in other simulators. I wish Assetto Corsa 1 had ranking and stuff built into the game. Will it ever happen? I don't think so. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully, at worst, hopefully you just enjoyed my little drive around the track. Get a content manager, get a shader patch, send Ilya some money so you can get the beta. It's well worth it just to support him. What a legend. But until the next one, let me know what you think in the comment section. Is this a more rounded video? Have you changed your mind from based off what I said in the previous one? You should have, because if you haven't after this, and God knows what I can say to convince you. But click that like button, subscribe, or don't. Until the next one, happy tea drinking, and goodbye everyone.